Hello, and welcome to this episode of Thoughts That Move, Season 3. Thoughts That Move is a platform that invites artists of various mediums to come together and discuss issues of race in their community or in the community at large. Today, we've gathered a group of 5 female artists specializing in dance and film to discuss their experience of being non-white in a world where whiteness dictates the cultural and social norms. My name is Parra Faudree, and I'll be the host of this episode. Our first guest is Alexa Capareda. She began studying ballet in her native Philippines, eventually trained in Austin and Montreal, and danced professionally with Ballet Bratislava in Slovakia. Alexa has worked in Austin since 2013 with performer dance Arcos. She is ballet master for Ballet Austin 2 and the Butler Fellows, and a co-producer with Frank Women Collective. She was a prize winner at the 2013 Festival of Choreographic Miniatures in Serbia and a recipient of the 2017 Austin Critics Table Award for Excellence as Dancer. Andreina Byrne is a filmmaker currently based in the Northeast. She produced and starred in the 2019 official Sundance Selection and Sundance Official Short Film Tour selection Crude Oil. Andreina has produced and designed music videos, album covers, and live installations for musicians like Mitski, Quinn NFN, Kevin Morby, and Waxahachie. You can check out some of her work on her website. It's www.andreinabyrne.com. Originally from Austin, Texas, Reyes received her BFA in dance performance and graduated magna cum laude from the Boston Conservatory in May 2011. Post-graduation, she danced professionally with several Boston-based companies and choreographers and taught across many different neighborhoods in Boston. After relocating to New York City, Anna joined the People Movers under the direction of Kate Ladenheim. In 2013, she choreographed and starred in 18, a video piece by acclaimed visual artist Hubbard and Birchler, which is currently on exhibit in art galleries internationally. Anna is extremely passionate about building a healthier, more thoughtful, and equitable society, and aims to do so through art, movement, and the power of human vulnerability and collaboration. Becky Nam grew up in College Station, Texas, and graduated in 2019 with a BFA in dance from the University of Texas at Austin. She's performed works by Sidra Bell, Jen Freeman, Lorenzo Rennie Harris, Raphael Xavier, and Yaakov Sharir, among others. This past year, she was a member of the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum in New York City and is interested in Asian American activism and solidarity work. Last but not least is Mia Moy. Mia grew up training at a classical ballet studio in Houston, Texas. She teaches and dances professionally in Austin for companies and dancers including Early Era Collective, Arcos Dance, Articulate Austin, and Will Walker. She currently studies at the University of Texas at Austin and directed the university's Steel Dance Company last season. And she is grateful to have been led by passion and love for the arts as she finishes her undergraduate degree and transfers into professional work career. So a little hand for all of y'all. I'm so grateful to have you guys here and have you be a part of this season. I kind of just want to dive right in and start with a question that I know we can all speak to. And that is, have you ever experienced or absorbed pressures to assimilate to white standards of perfection, specifically in your art form?
I think perfectionism in itself, I'm not going to say it's only a white value, but I do think a lot of that is sort of rooted in whiteness. All that being said, I think for me, the main form that took was definitely ballet. I don't think I realized it at the time, but when I looked back at my dance education and saw how ballet, which is obviously a Eurocentric art form, it's a pretty heteronormative art form. I felt the pressure of that mainly in terms of my body. Like my body doesn't really fit a white ideal. You can't see on this screen, but I'm under 5 feet tall. I'm muscular, I'm grounded. I'm not a super lanky, tall person. So anyways, all this to say, it definitely impacted me, but the ways that it did felt sort of covert and subtle while I was going through them. But when I looked back, I was like, oh, yep, whiteness was very much present in my dance education in mainly harmful ways.
For
me, it was really interesting to really look back on growing up. And I started ballet in the Philippines um, under the Royal Academy of Dance syllabus when I was 7. And from all of what we watched, and there were the ballet companies in the Philippines, but that the standard is, again, not like a short brown body. Um, and all of the DVDs I had, I had one of Gelsey Kirkland and Mikhail Baryshnikov that I would watch, VHS rather, that was the time that I would watch over and over again. And even just, movies and films in general. I imagine myself in what, like when I even dream up stories in my head of like stories that I make up, it's of white people, and not, even when I was younger. Yeah, and then even in the Philippines, it was interesting because in RAD syllabus you would have exams every year, and each year they would bring someone from the RAD who was certified to give you the test and give you marks on it. And so I was always excited to meet this. It's usually like super tall white lady or British lady, and we were always like super enthralled by that. And yeah, it kind of, in a way, I didn't feel it at the time, but it reminds me of how it's not part of, we're so separate of what has been and the standard.
I wonder if part of the reason why it felt so covert was you're so steep in it, and as we said, whiteness is sort of default. It's sort of like that David Foster Wallace quote where it's like, well, what's the fish swimming in water? Well, what's water? You have no idea because your entire surrounding, like that's what you're steeped in. And so I wonder if a service that you can do for future dance students is naming these things, not devaluing ballet, but putting it on a level playing field with everything else.
Anthropologists say this all the time, like it's a reflection of the people and the culture at the time. And so I guess that's the big thing with ballet, is we forget it's a reflection of white people in the French courts at the time that it was created,
There was an article that's picking a lot of, controversy, or not controversy, but just a lot of discussion, which I think has been really fruitful, in the New York Times, called "What is a Ballet Body?" I don't know if anyone has seen that, but it interestingly takes kind of a narrow perspective on it, and that they even kind of carelessly put some triggering terms like the actual weight of the dancer that I'm sure many people aspire to. And so it's and it doesn't really represent, and Teresa Ruth Howard, who I've spoken about in our past meeting and even in my first early era episode, points out that more voices of color should be included in that, you have like dark skinned and more muscular bodies to speak on what is an issue, again, that shrouds all of our consciousness. But I am glad that more conversations are happening on this, because, and going back into a segue of something that I always really want everyone to know about, is Teresa Ruth Howard's, she did a talk on that's on YouTube called Dark Muse, Balanchine and Blackness. And so George Balanchine, who many feel is, kind of the father of American ballet, or is big in the American style, actually was highly influenced by Black dancers around him. And he lived at a time where there was so much of Black excellence, and it's so in his work with Arthur Mitchell. And so Teresa's talk really talks about that, and it's just about uncovering these amazing artists who have already contributed to what ballet is currently. It's not something that's, it's not excluded. Like they're in there, they're just invisible. And that's like, so that's one thing that I'm like, yes, ballet is great. And a lot of the great things about it come from Black people. And so, yeah.
To add on to that, with the idea of like the imagination and just like defaulting to like the white image, Alexa, I just thought about like, even if I'm doing like contemporary dance or just like my own sort of like style and improv and choreographing and stuff, and I'm like thinking of lines and pictures, like the lines and pictures that are like ideal in my head are like the lines of like the hyperextended legs and like just really lean, long, like ballet style, like ballet body. And so like that didn't even cross my mind until like just now. But yeah, which is like to your point exactly. And then back where when Anna was saying in the beginning with like the body image, I remember like so growing up in like, I'm sure every sport, every dance thing has its own sort of critiques with like your image and your development as a child, but ballet especially. So that's what I can speak to. I remember like looking in the mirror, because like every wall's a mirror, right? And I would like look sideways in the mirror in my leotard, and I distinctly remember saying like, I pray to God my stomach is never fatter than my boobs. Like I hope that my stomach never protrudes further out than my boobs. And that was like just like ingrained in my mind. And then I was like, okay, time to do the combo now. So that was like, it's like that sort of thing, you know?
Yeah, Mia, I want to validate that so hard because I remember a lot of like body checking. And for me, a lot of it, my God, I've never said this to anyone, I don't think. But I would like often look down at my stomach and sort of like measure how far it came out, which if depending on how you stand on your feet too can totally change. But the other thing I remember too is often comparing myself a lot to other dancers in the studio, to the teacher, so many mean thoughts that would go through my head. And then it's like, how are you supposed to access your creativity if you're feeling so much self-hatred? It's just kind of impossible. So yeah, just wanted to share that to say you're not alone.
Andreina, I'm curious if you've had any experiences of assimilation or like white standards of perfection in the film industry, or like what the relationship between film and race is in your world.
Absolutely. I mean, thinking about even Alexa, you saying you imagine this dancer in your head or how a dancer would dance when you were maybe younger. And seeing them as a white dancer, I see the same thing too. When I think of someone who's in a film, like I've been trying to do an exercise lately where I am just like forcing myself to write my own perspective in a script, and it's really hard. Like it's really hard because normally what I do is I see this thing that I've always seen, or I see part of myself, or I see part of someone that I've looked up to, but actually isn't anything like me. So it's the same in the sense that there's this internal struggle that's very real and very much active. And also there are these representations that we do see, but they're just few and far between, or they're not representations of what today is.
I think so much of this conversation, the phrase that keeps coming to my head is representation matters. And it's like, we think about it like, yeah, I want to see Misty Copeland up on stage because it shows little Black girls that they can be on the stage too, and they can be prima ballerinas. But at the same time, I think that can work in more nuanced ways. That's a crucial way people learn, is seeing it. And you kind of don't even, it's one of those things like you don't know that you didn't know it until you realize you didn't know it.
Yeah, one thing that came to mind, this goes with, I guess, like any sort of identification thing, but it's like, Alex, as you're saying, when, you know, people of color or minorities shouldn't get like pigeonholed into like a single narrative that they feel like they have to represent like 24/7. It's like my ethnicity or my like sexual orientation like influenced my personality and has influenced my personality, but my personality is not being Asian, right? It's like square rectangle sort of thing. That's what came to mind.
Yeah, that personality being Asian thing is just huge, and especially something that even people I dearly, dearly love, especially when I was working in Europe, you know, that kind of like was my thing. It's like, oh, she's Asian, she, you know, is like she's got the numbers and which is kind of, yes, like I count well and like whatever, I'm organized in certain ways, but it became like, and like, oh, and your little Asian eyes, and like people I love, which again is totally like um fine, not fine, but it's yeah, that just became the thing. And that's something that I spoke about last time, on that, as much as, I'm glad that we're having these conversations more in the States. I feel like, especially in Europe, it was much more pronounced, and um, people were not really even aware of how skewered their perspectives were. For example, one of my colleagues was, we were just having one of our lunch chats, and one of my friends, who's Serbian, Luxembourgish girl, and we were just talking about, I don't know what got to this conversation, but he was talking about, oh, when we opened the dictionary, we would see Natasha, she would be like the definition of beautiful. And you're kind of like, you're not beautiful, and you have like something special, but it's more like, you're like cute, and you're like exotic, and and he just kind of kept digging this hole. And and I was like, I get it. Yep. I mean, I agree. Natasha is a beautiful woman, but and already like felt, but at the time I was also like, yeah, it's true, I'm just cute, like I accepted that. So I never, still, like, it's so hard for me to think of myself as beautiful, because of things like that, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's one of the like biggest dangers about when racism operates on this invisible level, is you internalize it and you start to think, oh, yep, that's me, I'm cute, I'm not beautiful. And it reminds me, I want to tell this quick story because it just, I think, encapsulates this. I remember once I took an open class at Boston Ballet, and then I headed over to Back Bay Yoga just to do a yoga class. And I got there pretty early, and the receptionist said, why don't you just wait in the lobby? Someone's cleaning it, they'll come out, then you can go in. And I was like, okay. And I was waiting, and then I saw the yoga trainee, come out with like the vacuum cleaner. And it was this young white girl in like Lululemon. And in that moment, I was like, huh. And I was surprised. And I registered my surprise. And I was surprised because it wasn't an old Hispanic lady. And like I had internalized, oh, Hispanic cleaning lady. That happens to align with who I am. So I think I've had similar things where you just start to you not only accept certain things about yourself, but then you extrapolate that out onto your own race.
I tell this story all the time, and it's not my story to tell. It's about my dad, but it's like the exact same situation. Is he worked for Dell and was like relatively successful in that company. And there was a big gala event one time, and he was actually making a speech at the event, and one of his coworkers or someone who worked with him came up and tapped him on the shoulder and said, excuse me, sir, can you go grab me another drink? And he had assumed that my dad was serving the drinks and not actually there making a speech. And my dad he just did it, which I always find interesting. He was just like, sure, I'll get you a drink. And then got up there and like made his speech and kind of like looked at that guy and just saw how embarrassed that guy was. But it's so true. Like, we think of all these instances that have impacted our lives, but then it just is so much bigger than that. It frames how you see everybody. You think like, how do we change that? How do we get that out of kids' heads so that they don't then bring it on to the world at large?
I think one of the first steps is really just naming it. And you got to name it and you got to call it out. Sometimes it's not always calling in, unfortunately. I think in spaces like this, we can, because I think we've built trust and we're here to discuss these things and we know it. And it can be very hard. It can be really hard to do, especially when you're in a social system that you feel like there's really not a lot of room to. But I don't know how else it will start to change without identifying it and naming it first.
interestingly, more recently, there's just been more of a reclaiming of the language and getting a new appreciation for Filipino culture, pre-colonization, which is, huge because we were colonized first by Spain for 300 years. And so Spanish culture is huge in the Philippines as well. And again, there's those different standards, but I find, and a lot of my former classmates who are doing amazing work on, pushing towards like what is, being truly Filipino, because that was for me, like, again, growing up in the Philippines, even though I was growing up in the Philippines up until the age of 14, I felt like we were all still trying to assimilate into white American culture. And so at least, I have hope well, I don't know how much hope, but that's hopefully like, steering towards that direction. So then I was going to ask, for those of you who grew up like, in Austin or, I don't know, yeah, I just wanted to ask a little bit about that on what you felt.
Simulation wise?
Like it's specifically in like your community, I guess, that, yeah.
Yeah, I think it gets really complicated because we all have histories of immigration. Our countries of origin have their histories of colonization, imperialism, all of that stuff, wars with each other, like there's anti-indigeneity everywhere, like in every single country globally, and anti-Blackness everywhere, the ways that shows up. I think that for myself as a Korean American, a second generation Korean American, there is a lot of work to do within Asian Americanness about like rejecting assimilation altogether. What even is Americanness? Why do we aspire to it if it comes with also the oppression and invisibilization of so many other people within our community?
I obviously can't speak to Asian American communities at all, but I guess I'll just echo that it did feel invisible. It really did. And I think part of that, which I know I mentioned before, was that my dad is from Mexico, came to the United States when he was around 13, 14. My mom is from Michigan originally, but her parents were, I think they were also born in the United States or maybe came over, but from Europe and like Poland and Russia. So it's this weird like Jewish side and a Mexican side kind of coming together. And for whatever reason, I'm sure there's a lot to unpack there, but my mom was much more influential in like the family rituals. Like, let's celebrate Hanukkah. Let's go to Michigan to celebrate Passover. I had a bat mitzvah, but I didn't have a quinceañera. So like, I felt very out of touch with my Mexican heritage. I didn't really know what being brown, what did that mean? I don't know. I still think I'm answering that question. But the other thing I think is interesting that just occurred to me is I grew up in obviously hugely white spaces. And even though that has caused a lot of harm for sure, I think it's important to talk about the privilege that's given me. I can really access so many institutions because I can speak sounding like a white person. I'm definitely afforded a lot of privilege by that. And I think that's another thing that's really important to name.
I was going to say something really similar to that, because I feel like it's important that I say that I'm half white and half Ecuadorian. And so like, even just the color of my skin affords me so much privilege. And like the fact that I can white pass so easily gives me so much. And so, and I think again, for me too, there's a lot to unpack there. Like I always kind of felt like my Ecuadorian culture was there and present, and I was proud of it. But I did notice in certain situations, in most situations that were mainly white, I would kind of put that in a box, put my Ecuadorian side in a box and really highlight the white side of me, which is, not good. But I think I noticed that my dad did that too, and also ended up being quite successful, having moved here, not speaking a word of English at age 15. And so I kind of saw like, oh, if you just play into white culture, you'll go somewhere. And I think that's just incredibly sad. And as I've gotten older and done more of this work, I've really started to see how that's played out.
Maybe that's another learning by watching. Like, I'm sure my dad, he doesn't pass as white. He would always say, well, your mom doesn't speak fluent Spanish, so I didn't feel like I could really teach it to you. But I think another question is, well, why didn't that feel important enough to try? And I'm not saying like, oh, it's all his fault. It's on me to learn it if I want to learn it now. And like, interestingly, my younger sister, she can speak Spanish fluently and has traveled abroad and lived in Spanish speaking countries a lot. She studied abroad in Spain, lived in Mexico for a while. So it's my job to do now. But at the same time, I do think it's interesting to kind of look at, okay, I watched my parents and I learned from them, and how did that affect me?
I have definitely can understand where you guys are coming from, because even from, especially from a professional standpoint, being on certain sets and someone will make not so much in the past, I would say 2 years, but before that, I have been on sets where people will make just awful comments, whether it relates to someone being Hispanic or et cetera, any sort of differentness, of course. But it's been interesting to me because they will make these comments in front of me. And then when I say something about it, they just think, I know, and I can feel it, that they're assuming things about me even further and being like, oh, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, no, but you actually, like, this is even worse. Like, you are doing exactly what I already know you're doing, but like, this is even more hurtful because I can't even identify with what I am by trying to stand up for what I am and for just the people who aren't here to defend themselves. So it's very interesting, especially to see from a parental standpoint, like how they've succeeded in trying to blend in with this whiteness and to take advantage of that. And it is absolutely a privilege to be able to even say that you can be in such fashion, to say that you can be white passing. Like, I have absolutely benefited so much from that. And that's confusing in itself. But also it's absolutely a privilege. But it has been interesting being, specifically from a professional standpoint, and being in these environments and being like, wow, not only am I benefiting from this, but also now I'm hearing the strange side that I don't think you would have said had you known what I was. So it's
good for you for saying something. Like, that's hard to do.
Yeah. And so especially like,
do.
Thank you. In like, I mean, not even thank you. I don't know. It was interesting because even being like super young doing it and feeling just pissed off and mad and not knowing what it was, like not knowing how to name things, it is nice to be able to be in an environment, even like this one, to be able to put names to certain feelings and certain things that matter.
In line with what we're talking about, but it's a tangent, if that's okay. Because I do think the narrative of like assimilation and the in-betweenness, where we have like proximity to whiteness in some aspects, and also, what is that phrase, like oppressed oppressors, like we all oppress in some ways because of our privileges and have also been oppressed in other ways by marginalized identities. And I think that is like a really important space to hold in the context of race in America, of being like, okay, this country was founded on anti-Black violence. I am not white passing, but I have enormous privilege, like as an East Asian American with class privilege, with like all these other things. And that is a space where we have power and agency. And like, I can reject the ways that I uphold whiteness, and that is a lifelong struggle and my stuff to unpack. And I can align myself in solidarity with Black liberation because I know that helps my community too, like in the long run. So I think it's a valuable space, the in-between or whatever it is, liminality, all that stuff, you know.
It's super important, Becky. I completely agree with you. And you're making me think of Meghan Markle, right? Like, she aligned with the oppressors in a big way. And like, of course, that's a really simplified, unnuanced way to say it, but she got hurt really badly. And obviously, I don't know what else to say about that, but I do think there's a certain power in aligning, as you said, with oppressors. And I think often also, I think we do it unconsciously a lot of the time too. And that's another part of the work. Right, yeah. Right.
It keeps you, it will keep you, it's a way to survive. And that is not a way to live.
I think when we first discussed this too, another thing that was really fresh was the sort of like battle of like, how oppressed are you? We talked a little bit about that. And it's like, no, it's not a battle.
It's like, not a competition.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah.
But when people in power frame it that way, it's very purposeful. It's so that people without power don't come together to kick the people in power out. Yeah. So like, there is a function to that. And that's really important to know too.
I think it's also important to say and recognize when our, like, if we're going to bring in, I know we talked about it last time, like the Asian American elder violence that's happening, and recognizing that anti-Asian racism is not the same as anti-Black racism. It is not on the same systemic level. And being able to hold those realities, we can fight for our community without trying to compare it, our oppression, to another like communities. It's not necessary. It's like, and it's also not true to say that those two things are the same.
I would like to just kind of throw out a question that is broad, and I know we've touched on it, but what kind of calls to action should we offer people who are listening to this conversation, or people who want to start to change the world in a positive way? Like, are there any bits of advice that y'all have at top of mind that you would like to speak on?
Any work that we do within our communities has to be in solidarity with Black liberation. Otherwise, there is no point. It is a losing game if you are trying to gain something at the expense of Black liberation. So anything, COVID-related harassment, if it has to do with bringing in the police, that's a losing game in the long run.
I think the only other thing I'll say is, and I need to do more of this myself, I want to get more active in the voting rights fight. Like, we won Georgia by this much, and it was thanks to Black voters. And Republicans are already, maybe not. I feel like it's a dangerous thing when it is Republicans doing it. We got to name it. So anyways, Republican politicians are already, I think, trying to scale back voting. So that's something I'm looking to get more involved in.
I think just being aware, and again, like, I think Anna's been saying this a lot of naming things, and even, not out loud, but like, as you recognize things happening, and if there is, someone you can point that out to in that situation, it's talking about what is happening, what has happened, and context. I think there's no, like, burying any context is not useful. And it's easy to, like, the communities that you're in, like, someone is more likely to know somebody who is gay who is within their circle. Whereas if you're in a circle of white people, you're not going to talk to these people. So then you're less likely to see what they see. And so I think that's just, like, closer to home. So I think, I don't know what it is, but mixing, like, communities, like talking to each other, finding a way and not just like staying within our bubbles, which is so scary. Like you just see now how easily it is to realize that there are perspectives other than yours, and there's sometimes it's really difficult to even initiate those conversations. Like it's scary because it can be hurtful. But I want to find a way, and I don't have the answers, but like, how do you talk to someone who believes this so fully, and that it's like unfounded, like in your what you know, and I don't know. And then also thinking like, where can I be like, I am totally convinced of this, but it's actually wrong, like just questioning all of those things.
Those are all really good suggestions. Thank you guys. And just thank you in general for your time. We've sadly reached the end of our episode. So again, I just want to say that I appreciate each of you guys for opening up and sharing your thoughts. You can catch other episodes of season 3 of Thoughts That Move on our YouTube page. And we will also be releasing details about future episodes on our Instagram at Early Era Collective. So stay tuned for more information about that. But thank you for being a part of this one. And thank you to y'all out there who are watching it. Have a great day and keep doing the work.